This is episode number 169 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast, one of the shooting world's biggest gun talk programs. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, law enforcement, and the firearms industry. But before we get started, let's hear a word from our sponsor, 4 Patriots Survival Food Kits. National security experts are warning our aging power grid is more vulnerable than ever. January marked the third time a power station in North Carolina was damaged by gunfire. Authorities are saying the attack raises a new level of threat. Authorities are now checking our grid for vulnerabilities, and they've identified 9 key substations. If these substations were attacked, power could be knocked out from coast to coast for up to 18 months. Imagine a blackout lasting not days, but weeks or months. Your life would be frozen in time right at the moment the power fails. Lights all over the country would go out, throwing people into total darkness. That's why having your own portable solar power now is more important than ever. The Patriot Power Sidekick from 4 Patriots is a solar generator that you don't install in your house. It's quick, it's easy, it's portable. You can use it on the go or even inside. It's small, about the size of a lunchbox, but it's powerful. Powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, or even a mini fridge. It comes with a free solar panel and free shipping, and a practically unheard of 365-day satisfaction guarantee. And not only that, you get 10% off your first purchase by typing in the code GUNMAG at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com and use the code GUNMAG to get 10% off your first purchase of the Patriot Power Sidekick or anything else in their store. That's 4patriots.com. Use the code GUNMAG. This week we've got a pretty important episode. It's a topic that's a little uncomfortable, but we're going to talk about veteran suicide prevention with Dr. Matthew Miller. He's the Director of Suicide Prevention Programs for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Miller stopped by our booth at the recent SHOT Show, and we talked about the suicide prevention problem among veterans and, by extension, those in law enforcement and the gun industry as a whole. Dr. Miller shared some positive steps friends or family members can take if they suspect someone is contemplating suicide, and even more importantly, some resources and insight for those who might be considering suicide themselves. As I mentioned during our interview, if you're having those kind of thoughts, please don't apply a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Now here's Dr. Matthew Miller and our discussion of veteran suicide prevention. Dr. Matthew Miller, he is the Executive Director of the VA Suicide Prevention Program. Matt, thanks for joining me here on the Guns Magazine podcast.
Great to be here, Brent. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Well, it may sound a little bit different than normally. We are at the SHOT Show in Las Vegas, and Dr. Miller was available, and we wanted to make time to talk to him. This is probably a lot different than what we normally talk about. Normally, we kind of try to have some fun and, a little bit of recreation, but this is something that is so important. We need to talk about it, and he is an expert on suicide prevention, especially in the veterans community, and that's why it is so important, as many of our listeners are veterans, and unfortunately in the gun industry in general, suicide's a problem, and we don't like to talk about it. So let's go there first. I mean, the stigma, many of us have been touched by it, but we still don't like to even talk about it, and we should be, because that's maybe how we can stop it from continuing.
Yeah. Well, there's two topics, at least 2 topics that are extremely personal. One is your mental health and suicide. A second is firearms. And so when the two come together, it can amplify the personal nature of the topic and then the awkwardness as well. But the fact that we are talking about it and talking about it in a way that demonstrates there's reason for hope, and there's ways to talk about this that are helpful.
Well, before we go any further, though, why is this such a passion for you?
Well, I am a veteran, and I was taking a look at that point in time as a veteran where commissioned officer, you either sign on for the next assignment and round after you're fulfilling your first, or you exit honorably. At that point in time, one of my best friends, a Marine Cobra driver, died by suicide. And that really changed the trajectory for me, personally and professionally. And after a couple years of spinning and thinking and, frankly, darkness, it led to renewed commitment and effort regarding suicide and suicide prevention for our military and for our veterans.
Well, talk a little bit about what it is you do now.
Well, what we're building is really founded upon three what I think are truths. We call it our broken arrow plan. It's what we run to when all else is confusing or unclear. Number one, suicide is preventable. We know that suicide is preventable. Take a look at our annual report. We see that we've had a 10% decrease in suicide the last 2 years of data. There are things that can be done. It's not inevitable. Number two, we know that it's not just clinical. It's not just an issue of mental health and getting treatment. There are also issues in our neighborhood, the world around us, that need to be addressed and worked on together. That gets to the third point, which is we all have a role to play. So that leads us to that combination of truths has led us to what we're currently working on with regard to veteran suicide prevention and firearms. 70% of veteran suicides are firearm related. And that's why we're here today to talk about firearm safe storage and securing firearm in the context of certain times and places in a veteran's life.
So talk about this process of working with a veteran who might be having some thoughts that they don't need to be having.
Yeah. Well, I think the first point with that is that we all have those points. We
Agreed.
all have points where it's dark, it's personal, and we're wondering and hoping no one else finds out. We're embarrassed. We're losing hope. And that's the first message we want to get across, that's not a unique human experience. But veterans, a lot of times, this isn't a bad thing, but veterans a lot of times are treated like heroes. And, how often do you see a hero trying to work out the bills? How often do you see a hero rejected for a job or getting in trouble at the
right.
How often do you see a hero standing in front of a judge or having divorce papers served to them? So veterans experience these things like everyone else. It can be dark. So it's helping veterans know, hey, you're going to have these times. We all are. And that's where our Don't Wait, Reach Out campaign has come in, just helping veterans to understand it's okay to reach out. The second aspect then is understanding that during those dark times, you can have these really short 60 minutes or less points in time where you got access to a firearm and you find yourself thinking about using that firearm against yourself. We know that 70% of the time, the distance between having that thought and taking action is 60 minutes or less. So our key message there is during those points in time, put a little time and space between yourself, the firearm, and ammunition. Come back to it later. Life will be saved.
Wow. So 60 minutes, that's
60
the
minutes.
golden hour, as they say in emergency medicine,
Yep.
but apparently in when we're talking about suicide prevention, same kind of thing.
Absolutely. And then 90% of the time, if a firearm is involved, it's fatal. But those who attempt and survive say after the fact, I'm so glad that I'm still here, and they're able to reflect on that. So taking that time and space, life-saving.
Absolutely. Talk about, I'm not a veteran, but I did law enforcement my entire adult career till I became a magazine editor. Well, thank you. But I also understand the whole separation. When you're in the military or you're in law enforcement, you're part of something bigger. You're part of, truly
a
mission. Exactly. And then when you're separated from that, some guys do fine. Some guys, there's a big hole in their life.
Yep.
How do you guys talk to veterans to work them through that?
Yeah, first we try to help all veterans and everyone understand that times of transition are a challenge for everyone. And for veterans, it's a particularly high-risk period for suicide and suicide prevention. So making sure that we're reaching out, making sure that we're building those connections and open to those connections during those transition times is really important. Sometimes in those times, veterans can really isolate and withdraw. And so we're messaging, that not the best time to isolate and withdraw. Keep at it. Keep looking for those resources. Keep reaching out. And again, that's where the Don't Wait, Reach Out campaign really comes in.
Yeah. Talk about the role of family and friends, because unfortunately, dealing with suicides, there were signs beforehand, and we all, in hindsight, it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd called somebody or confronted them. What should friends and family do when they feel like somebody is getting to that edge and starting to think those thoughts?
I think the first step is know some basic signs to look for, knowing that this isn't 100% predictable, but some basic signs are usually summarized by you're noticing changes in this person that you care about. You're noticing changes in what they're interested or not interested in. You're noticing changes in sleep, in eating, in activity, in the way they're talking, in their attitude, in their work performance. Those kinds of changes we often kind of want to talk ourselves out of and say, maybe it's nothing, I'll just keep an eye on it. That's where the second point comes in. Opening the door for talking about suicide and suicide risk is one of the most life-saving things you can do. And the best way to do that is just by embracing the awkward and saying, hey, suicide, where are you at with that? Do you think about it? People think about it.
Yeah.
What about you? That helps. It doesn't plant a seed, as many people think.
And I've been part of that discussion before, and it's so hard, especially guys.
Yeah.
Women tend to do a better job of relating emotionally, but guys, we're macho and we're tough, and it feels really strange to go to a buddy and say, what's going on, man?
Yeah. Well, I tell the story often. My two best friends in the military were Marine officers and Cobra drivers. And when I learned of John's death by suicide, my buddy, Ray, called me up, and the first question he asked was, did you hear? The second question he asked was, did you know? And both Ray and I said we didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's because among all the things we talked about in serving together and living in close quarters, we never ourselves directly talked about our own mental health or suicide.
Well, of course not, because we're guys.
Yeah.
That's not something you're supposed to touch on, but you have to.
Yeah. And that's an important lesson that I've had to learn in my own life. I mean, it's one thing to say it academically or from a textbook perspective, but then actually doing it in my own life, and then friends and I talking about suicide. I had this conversation with two buddies 2 weeks ago when I saw them in Columbus, Ohio. And that never would have happened 15 years ago.
Yeah. So talk about some of the things that the VA can do for veterans who get with you and say, look, something's not right in my life. What are some of the things you guys can do?
Well, we can provide same-day services. We can provide crisis services, such as dialing 988 and pressing 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. That's available 24/7, 365. Same-day services are available through the local VA. And we also had what's called the Compact Act recently fully engaged. That happened this week. That provides suicide prevention-related emergency services for free for all veterans at a VA, at a local hospital, non-VA, and then follow-up services up to 90 days.
Wow. Something I was sitting here thinking, just, all these things that I've experienced in my life. Talk about the role of alcohol in suicides, because it's there a lot.
Yeah. Well, what we see is that alcohol is it's just known factually, it decreases our inhibitions. And so sometimes when you're in those 60-minute windows and you would have that part of your brain that says, you know what, now would be a good time to separate myself from the firearm, from the ammunition. You mix alcohol in, and your ability in that part of your brain kind of decreases a little bit. So yeah, consuming alcohol during these periods can be a risk factor, and that's one that we also talk about in terms of time and place.
Yeah. If somebody is in that position and they're having the thoughts, is there anything they can do for themselves to kind of self-help? I know if things are getting that bad and that dark, they need to seek professional help, talk to the VA or something. But if somebody's just kind of at the edge there, is there anything you would tell them, think about this or think about that?
The first thing I would say in terms of thinking about it is you're not crazy. You're not losing it. You're a human being who is experiencing what a lot of human beings experience. And that helps to kind of de-escalate it a little bit, normalizing yourself rather than pathologizing yourself. I think the second thing is then reaching out in a way that you're okay with. That could be dialing 988 and pressing 1 and talking to the Veterans Crisis Line. That could be picking up the phone and calling a fellow veteran. That could be talking to family members. Whatever is acceptable and accessible for reaching out, that's a good second step.
And if somebody reaches out to you, your buddy calls you and says, man, I'm thinking things here.
Yeah.
What are some good responses they should provide?
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. I want to talk with you about this, and let's talk it through. I'm here for you, and I'm staying with you through this. And then from there, just talk. There is no magic formula necessarily. I will say, though, if you find yourself needing backup or wanting some additional resources, you can call the Veterans Crisis Line. You can do a 3-way through the Veterans Crisis Line. We do that every day.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Talk a little bit about how this process works. Obviously, you can't name names or specific cases, but talk a little bit. You or your people get a call. What kind of happens from that point where somebody's saying, look, things are going bad for me. I need some help. Then what happens?
First question is, tell me about it. And then we follow the callers or the texters or the chatters lead from there. We'll get to a point where we'll determine, so how much of a risk is this right now? Right. And we'll do that with the veteran. And then that'll determine the options that we go from there. We will probably do what's called a safety plan. The safety plan will include a question like, so, do you have access to a firearm? If so, what can we do for safe and secure storage when you're at most risk? What are you willing to agree to? And then working that out and through.
So, I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but the government, the VA, big government, everybody's a little nervous about that. If people are hesitant to contact the Veterans Administration to engage some of these services, because people may think, well, I'm going to lose my retirement, my pension. They may lock me up. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I think there's two ways to go with that. I think one way is, all right, so let me talk about being from the federal government and coming in peace, and I'm here to help. But then let's talk other options as well. So from a federal government perspective, when we're talking about this, we're talking about veteran suicide. We're not talking about restriction of Second Amendment rights. We're talking about respect for firearm, respect for rights. And in that context, then moving on our conversation to that secure storage, safe storage during higher risk time periods. So the message should be clear. This is not about restriction. This is about respect. This is about secure storage. Now, I think that there's other possibilities and other organizations that we work with who do a really good job with veteran-to-veteran outreach, who do a really good job with coming in and offering resources that are non-federal sort of level. And that's why it's so important for us to be here and forming those partnerships.
Well, I think it's cool. As I've said before, we're at the SHOT Show, Shooting, Hunting, Outdoor Trade Show, and you guys are here. You're talking to people.
Right.
And because a lot of military veterans are part of the firearms industry, so obviously you guys really want to reach out to these people.
Yeah, and I hope that sends the message that there is a respect there from us for firearms, for Second Amendment rights, and within that context, we're here to talk about the secure storage and the safety aspects.
Yeah.
I would encourage people that if they're wanting to explore this a little more, they're wanting to figure out what this is all about, go to our website, keepitsecure.net. It'll give you access to the PSAs. It'll give you access to other resources. Also have access to family members, like how to start the conversation, how to work through the awkward, things like that.
Yeah. Give me a success story.
I think a big success story has been the 10% decrease that we've seen in veteran suicides. I think a second, more specific example is the fact that we're sitting here today and I'm talking to you. This is the first time I've talked to you. This is the first time I've talked to many others. And this is the first time that we've been received so warmly in this context.
Good.
That represents, I think, a huge success in terms of people embracing veteran suicide prevention, people wanting to have a positive role, and recognizing the role that the firearm industry and owners can have within saving veterans' lives, all in the context of respect for rights.
Absolutely. And it is pretty remarkable. There's a number of organizations now that are trying to be pretty aggressive, because any of us that have been in law enforcement, military, or just the gun industry, we probably all at least know of somebody, if not know somebody very well, that chose a gun.
Yeah.
And it just, the aftermath is so devastating and so senseless. And you just wish they would have reached out, or you would have reached out to them.
Yeah, I've lived it. Yeah. And we know from the research that for every suicide, at least 135 people are significantly impacted in that person's life by
what
that.
A number.
So it's like exponential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, from the law enforcement side, going to a suicide, you just wish you could grab that person and say, do you see what's going on here? Your family, it's just, I've heard the term a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah.
And you wish you could make people understand that.
And a lot of times it's amazing how in that 60-minute window, some of those thoughts seem so accurate. Thoughts like, they'll be better without me.
Yeah.
I can never get out of this. There's no hope. There's no escape. Those kinds of thoughts seem so real in those windows of time. And that's why it's important to separate yourself during those points in time from something that could kill you. When you were talking and starting to present that, I thought of something my dad taught me once when I was younger growing up, and I was going through a hard time. And I was struggling with some thoughts that I was having. And my dad did not criticize me for having those thoughts, didn't judge me. What he said was, Matt, you can't keep a bird from landing on your head, but you can keep it from building a nest.
Wow.
And what that really has taught me and how it's generalized to what we do in suicide prevention is we got a lot of birds that land on our heads. And what they bring can be very surprising, alarming, embarrassing, concerning. The key, though, is you don't have to own that bird, and
right.
You don't have to let it sit there and build a nest. So shooing it away and not letting it just sit and build and build and build. And that's really where the reaching out component comes. That's where the distancing from the firearm component comes. That helps to deconstruct the nest, move that bird along.
What a great analogy. I'll be thinking of that.
A little Southern Ohioism there for you.
Exactly. Well, the term, I always have is you're letting somebody live rent-free in your head. Don't let them do that.
Exactly.
But same kind of thing.
Exactly.
Well, in the time we have left, let's boil this down. What is it you want veterans to know after all we've talked about? What do you want them to know and to think about when they face a dark time?
This isn't about restriction of rights. This is about respect for rights. And in life, in that context, you probably will have a dark period. In that dark period, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if certain birds land on the head, like suicide and other things. Focus on shooing it away, and during that time, distancing yourself from things that can kill you. Taking those steps, I can almost guarantee you, will be something that you'll look back on and say that was life-changing. That was a dark moment to a life-changing moment.
Wow. Talk about the phone number, website again.
Yeah, so 988 is the number to call for Veterans Crisis Line, then press 1 for veterans. We're there 24/7. Go to keepitsecure.net for resources on firearm safe, secure storage in the context of suicide prevention for veterans.
Well, Dr. Matthew Miller, the Executive Director of VA Suicide Prevention, it's been a somewhat tough talk to have, but it's a talk that needs to be had. And if there's any listeners out there having that moment right now, don't. The world is not better off without you. Reach out, get some of these resources, or just call a buddy and talk to them.
So, amen to that. Yep.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Miller, thank you very much for stopping by the Guns Magazine podcast.
Appreciate it.
Dr. Matt Miller made some great points, and please take advantage of the resources, which we will list in the show notes, that he talked about if you or someone you know is considering suicide. If there's a topic you want to hear, someone you'd like us to interview, or you want to share your thoughts, please drop me a line at editor@gunsmagazine.com. As always, you can find us on your favorite podcast directory, such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and many others. And there's also YouTube and at gunsmagazine.com. You can also subscribe to the Gun Cranks audio podcast on those same directories, or watch it at our Gun Cranks YouTube channel. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites and at Amazon. And before we go, I'd like to remind you to visit our sponsor, 4 Patriots Survival Food Kits. You can find out more about their great food kits or solar generators at 4patriots.com. That's the number 4, the word Patriots, and .com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.